When I was 21, my relationship with my father completely deteriorated. He was a notorious hothead, and our arguments often escalated into emotionally violent, screaming matches. During one particularly explosive fight on May 9th, 2015, the environment at home became so toxic that I had no choice but to grab an overnight bag and leave for my own sanity. Desperate for a quiet place to cool off, I checked into a Quality Inn and Suites located just half a mile from my neighborhood. It felt ridiculous to spend nearly $100 to sleep so close to my own bed, but I needed the isolation. It was only 4 p.m., an unusual time for my family blowouts. I wandered down to the hotel's outdoor pool to clear my head. The entire property felt like an abandoned liminal space. The pool was entirely deserted. The long carpeted hallways were silent. Other than the bored receptionist at the front desk, I seemed to be the only living soul in the building. The front desk had inexplicably placed me in a room right in the middle of the second floor hallway. After freezing by the pool, I retreated to my room and threw myself onto the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Then I heard it, an incredibly soft, hesitant tapping against the wooden door. Tap, tap, tap. I lay perfectly still, waiting for the inevitable shout of housekeeping, but the silence stretched on. I had specifically hung the rigid cardboard "Do Not Disturb" sign on the exterior handle, so I decided to ignore it. But a second later, a chilling sound pierced the quiet. Beep, click. It was the electronic whir of the keycard reader. The heavy deadbolt retracted with a heavy metallic thud. Slowly, agonizingly, the door began to creak inward. I sat up, my heart skipping a beat. From my position on the bed, a protruding wall blocked my view of the entrance. No thank you. Not right now," I called out, assuming an incredibly rude employee was ignoring the sign. There was a heavy, pregnant pause. The air in the room seemed to turn freezing cold. I repeated myself, my voice trembling slightly. Suddenly, the door slammed shut with a violent bang that made me jump out of my skin. Anger quickly replaced my initial shock. I stormed over to the door, yanked it open, and stepped out into the hallway, fully prepared to berate the intrusive maid. I looked sharply to my right. Empty. I looked to my left, just in time to see the right leg of an older woman, clad in dark pants, pivoting sharply around the far corner of the hallway. "Hey!" I shouted, sprinting down the corridor. How had she moved so unbelievably fast? By the time I rounded the corner, the long hallway was completely empty. I heard the muffled thud of a heavy door clicking shut somewhere in the distance, but there were at least 20 identical closed doors lining the walls. It was impossible to tell which one she had slipped into. I marched downstairs and angrily reported the bizarre encounter to the front desk. The receptionist sighed, attributing the incident to a clumsy, rude housekeeper named Rosa. Appeased but still on edge, I left to grab a solitary dinner at a nearby restaurant, returning later that evening to watch TV. By 9 p.m., the emotional exhaustion of fighting with my father caught up with me, and I fell into a deep and heavy sleep. Sometime deep in the middle of the night, I was violently pulled from my dreams by a raspy, guttural whisper in the dark. "You have to let them in." My blood ran completely cold. I rubbed my heavy eyes, trying to make sense of the shadows. I slowly sat up in the pitch-black room. Towering over the left side of my mattress, staring directly down at my face, was a shadowy figure. The stench of stale sweat and something sickeningly metallic filled my nostrils. I opened my mouth to scream, But before any sound could escape, a pair of cold, bony hands violently clamped around my throat. "You piece of shit," a woman's voice hissed, raining spittle onto my face. The grip was weak and frail, belonging to an elderly woman. Fueled by pure, blinding panic, I easily shoved her backward, tearing her hands from my neck. I scrambled off the mattress and threw myself toward the door, fumbling frantically with the locks. I could hear her heavy, shuffling footsteps, lunging after me in the dark. I ripped the door open and sprinted barefoot down the carpeted hallway, not daring to look back until I reached the brightly lit lobby. Trembling, gasping for air, and demanding the police be called, I finally learned the horrifying truth from the pale, stammering night manager. A housekeeper hadn't just been rude. Several days prior, one of the staff had carelessly lost a master key card, a card that granted unrestricted access to every single room in the building. I received a full refund and gave a frantic statement to the local police before driving back to my father's house in the dead of night. He actually showed a shred of sympathy when he saw the red marks on my neck. I never found out who that deranged woman was or how long she had been hiding in the empty rooms, waiting in the dark with that stolen key. It happened during the dead heat of summer when I was 12 years old. My mother, my much younger brother, and I were visiting a sprawling, unfamiliar city to see extended family. Rather than crowding into my relative's house, my mother had opted for the sterile comfort of a large, corporate hotel downtown. Because of the significant age gap between my brother and me, I was naturally burdened with the responsibility of being his temporary guardian whenever my mother was occupied. On the sweltering afternoon of our arrival, the immense hotel lobby offered a blast of freezing air conditioning. My mother instructed me to sit with my brother on a plush velvet sofa while she navigated the busy check-in desk. As we sat there minding our own business, the heavy glass doors slid open and a man walked in. He was utterly unremarkable. Mid-40s, generic clothing, a face you would instantly forget in a crowd. But it wasn't his appearance that caught my attention, it was his behavior. Instead of heading toward the reception desk or the elevators, he walked directly to the seating area and sat down on the sofa directly opposite ours. He didn't pull out a phone, he didn't pick up a magazine. He just sat there perfectly still, his eyes locked onto us. A cold prickle of paranoia crawled up the back of my neck. I tried to convince myself I was just being an over-imaginative kid. But the intense, unwavering stare felt predatory. Did he follow us in? Mercifully, my mother called us over, waving our plastic room keys. We hurried away, and the strange encounter completely slipped my mind as we spent the afternoon with our relatives. We returned to the hotel around 7 p.m. Seeking a way to exhaust my hyperactive brother, my mother suggested a trip to the indoor pool. We changed quickly and plunged into the echoing chlorine-scented room. We hadn't been in the water for more than 5 minutes when the heavy glass doors to the pool area swung open. It was him, the same man from the lobby. He was wearing heavy denim jeans and a thick sweater. Hardly appropriate attire for a humid indoor pool. He sat down on a plastic lounge chair, perfectly silent, watching us wade in the shallow end. I saw the exact moment the color drained from my mother's face. Her maternal instincts flared into overdrive. She swam over to me, her voice a tight, hushed whisper. "If he isn't gone in 5 minutes, we are leaving." He didn't move a muscle. We scrambled out of the water, wrapped ourselves in thin white towels, and practically ran back to our room. By 8 p.m., the doors were deadbolted, and we were trying to wash away the lingering anxiety by watching a rented movie. Halfway through the film, my mother stepped into the bathroom to take a shower. Over the roar of the water pipes, a sharp knock echoed from the heavy wooden door. "Housekeeping," a muffled voice called out. I frowned. It was incredibly late for the cleaning staff, but I knew we desperately needed extra towels. Like a foolish, naive child, I undid the deadbolt and pulled the door open. My heart completely stopped in my chest. Standing in the dimly lit corridor was the man in the sweater. He wasn't holding towels, he wasn't pushing a cart. He just stood there, a wide, deeply unsettling smile stretching across his face. He offered a slow, deliberate wave. I was paralyzed. Every terrifying scenario I'd ever seen on the news, kidnapping, torture, murder, flashed violently through my 12-year-old brain. I couldn't scream. My throat felt like it was packed with sand. Behind me, the shower water abruptly stopped. The man tilted his head, his smile never wavering. "How was your swim?" he asked, his voice entirely too calm. Suddenly, the bathroom door flew open. My mother took one look at the open door, grabbed the back of my shirt, violently yanked me backward, and slammed the heavy door shut, engaging every lock and chain in a frantic second. She lunged for the hotel phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the front desk. She demanded an immediate room transfer, entirely ignoring my panicked pleas to just call the police. As she shouted into the receiver, I stood pressed against the door, listening. Out in the carpeted hallway, the heavy, deliberate footsteps of the man slowly retreated, echoing into the silence. We switched floors that night and never saw him again, but I have never opened a hotel door without checking the peephole since. As a child, I harbored a deep, irrational terror of hotel rooms. While other kids loved the novelty of sleeping in a new place, I was plagued by an intense paranoia. I would lie awake, staring into the dark corners of the unfamiliar rooms, absolutely convinced that someone or something was standing there, watching me breathe. This fear was so severe that I forced my exhausted parents to let me sleep between them until I was nearly 10 years old. Eventually, I had to grow up and bury that fear. Now at 24, I travel frequently for business, spending countless nights alone in generic hotel chains. On one specific trip, my company put me up in a Comfort Inn in North Carolina. It was a completely unremarkable building, situated across a busy highway from a massive car dealership. My meetings weren't until the following afternoon, so I planned to spend the night indulging in bad takeout and horror movies. Ironically, I decided to watch the first Saw movie. I was lying in the crisp white sheets, totally engrossed in the film, when a sound completely shattered my focus. During a particularly tense scene, I heard a faint, distinct noise coming from the darkest corner of the room. Crackle. It sounded like dry plastic being crushed, or perhaps the rustling of a stiff fabric. I muted the television, straining my ears against the hum of the mini fridge. The sound was coming from inside the small, open closet near the front door. Instantly, my repressed childhood paranoia flooded back, wrapping around my chest like a vice. My imagination conjured horrific silhouettes lurking behind the hanging coats. But I was 24 years old. I was a professional. I aggressively told myself to stop acting like a terrified child. I turned the volume on the television up to drown out the silence, swallowed 2 strong sleeping pills from my toiletry bag, and forced myself to lie down. For the next 20 minutes, as the medication slowly pulled me under, I heard it again. Crackle, crackle. It wasn't constant. It happened every minute or so, just loud enough to be undeniable. But the heavy fog of the sleeping pills finally won, dragging me into a deep, chemical slumber. I don't know how much time passed. I was jolted awake by a much louder, more aggressive sound. It wasn't a subtle crackle anymore. It was the frantic, heavy rustling of cloth and zippers. I shot up in bed, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. The room was pitch black. I fumbled blindly in the dark, my panicked fingers finally slapping the switch of the bedside lamp. The sudden burst of yellow light illuminated my absolute worst childhood nightmare made flesh. Standing no more than 5 feet from my bed, right next to the closet, was a massive man. He had to be at least 6'5" and easily over 250 pounds. He was dressed entirely in black, a heavy dark hood pulled tight over his head, completely obscuring his features. He was violently rummaging through my open suitcase. Pure, unadulterated terror ripped out of my throat. I screamed, a raw, guttural shriek that echoed off the thin motel walls. The massive intruder froze, dropping my clothes, then immediately bolted out the door, disappearing into the dark hallway. He managed to steal my wallet and an expensive watch, but the financial loss was meaningless. That towering figure in the dark had reached directly into my childhood trauma and proved that the monsters in the dark corners were absolutely, terrifyingly real. It was a catastrophic realization that permanently shattered my ability to ever sleep alone in a hotel room again.
Now remember, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Then subscribe for more horrifying true stories.